Hey, howdy, fellas. Sorry I'm late. Happy New Year.
Hey, Dan. No worries. Adam and I were just talking about the podcast. You know, our fearless leader, Free Press editor, Paul Simmon, he called me yesterday. He had some suggestions for the podcast.
Okay. What does he have in mind?
He'd like us to spend less time messing around, just get right to the pod.
What, you mean like the funny bit off the top? Oh, for sakes. I can't believe that all the hard work we put into this podcast, that's all he has for us? Do less funny? You gotta be kidding me. We work our fingers to the bones to put out this podcast, and he has the nerve to insult us like that? I can't believe this.
Dan.
Yeah, Adam, what is it?
He also asked us to stop swearing so much.
Oh, for sakes.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
Welcome to what we are calling Season 3 of the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast. Can you believe we're on Season 3?
I really had no idea that we were even doing seasons, so...
I think it's Adam's filing system. That's basically how we figure out our seasons.
I just write things down and put a number on it each time we do it. So, happy episode 1 of the 3rd season. What's our shtick this season?
You know, I just want to say ahead of time, like if we were a BBC true crime, like copper procedural show, based on the number of episodes we have done, we'd be in season 14.
Well, we're already, we've got greater longevity than Fawlty Towers. That was only 2 seasons.
Well, there you go. I think that's a good standard to live up to. But, you know, most seasons...
Yeah, and we're fast approaching Gilligan's Island, so...
Oh, gee. Most seasons start in the spring. We don't do that in Manitoba. We are in the midst of a polar vortex here in Winnipeg. It's minus 40 every day outside. And we have reached another milestone in Manitoba. We are at the 100-day mark of Wab Kinu's NDP government. So that's kind of a arbitrary metric, as we often talk about in the media, is what's the first 100 days? Politicians make promises in the first 100 days. And how's your 14 cents of saving on gas so far there, Dan?
Well, there is no doubt that gas is cheaper. And for those Manitobans for whom that was an important issue, you can't say that he didn't do it.
Before you go too far down this road, I will observe that on New Year's Day, gas dropped considerably. And the next day, it went up almost to exactly where it was before. Yeah. And you just think to yourself, well, now that money's going to the oil company and not to the government.
Yeah, I think, you know, that was one of the complaints, actually, that New Democrats had about this plan, is that gasoline tax reductions are an incredibly inefficient and awkward way of providing savings. In my family, I prefer driving less. You know, like if gasoline's too expensive, then be a little deliberate about how you go out, you know, like carpool with members of your family. I don't know, like there's lots of things you can do.
And there was also the rumor about if this wasn't going to turn into savings, at least for consumers at the grocery store, which it appears it hasn't. In fact, the announcement yesterday was that inflation's still going up about 3% across the country. So things are still costing more grocery-wise, life-wise, rent-wise. That Wab Kinu's going to do something about it, but we haven't yet seen anything about that.
Well, of course, there's so very little government can do. I mean, the central bank is raising interest rates. That, you know, was an attempt to dampen spending, which I think largely this Christmas, it seems that it did dampen spending. We bought less stuff that we don't need and are going to throw out by, you know, March 31st at Christmas time. And the connection between gas taxes and even the federal carbon tax and the price of important things like grocery, it's so tenuous. Like I did a column where there's a study from, I think it's the University of Alberta, it might be the University of Calgary. Sorry, folks, I can't remember which one.
Oh, they're all the same.
They're all the same in Alberta.
as from coming from U of M guy.
Yeah. But they said like the federal carbon tax is like like 2 cents, 3 cents on a liter of gasoline. Like and clearly it has like a negligible, less than 1% impact on grocery prices. And to tell you the truth, the cost of transportation itself is really not the big, is the big driver. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes along the way. The United States actually has a government agency that publishes an analysis quarterly that measures all the different inputs to the price of food. And it's fascinating, like marketing is huge. All the advertising that the grocery stores do, grocery store markups are huge. Fuel taxes, not so much.
Well, the one thing that did come out over the holidays that is getting a bit of traction now, and I think that it's an issue on the horizon for Wabcanoes in terms of costs, is that the North is getting more expensive, and that their new aviation prices just came out for traveling in the North, and it's more expensive. It's always been kind of tenuous comparably to go to, let's say, Churchill or Thompson or any of these northern fly-in communities. But the cost now to travel is more expensive to travel in northern Manitoba than it is to go to Europe. And that's a kind of threshold that has always been kind of dancing around, but is now undoubtedly. So, for instance, to go to northern Manitoba, it's going to cost you upwards of about $2,000 return. And think about that in terms of people who are being medevaced out of communities for birthing. And I mean, this is going to be something on the horizon that Wabcanoe is going to have to deal with. But there is some pluses. The forensic nursing unit, which you've been writing about and researching, looks like that's been showing some signs of improvement. So the healthcare system, Wabcanoe and Zoma Asaguera, as the Minister of Health, has been doing this listening tour of the healthcare system. Just recently, they were in St. Boniface. And it seems as though there's a bit of a bounce back for nurses, are you noticing it?
Well, I mean, first of all, 100 days, particularly this most recent 100 days, is really a bad time to, it's a bad part of the calendar year in which to assess the worthiness or the work ethic of a government, because between really November or the end of the very, very brief fall sitting in the Manitoba legislature, nothing really gets done between then and when the budget is introduced. There's no legislative sitting, and so no new laws being passed, no legislative assembly, agenda. So I think that, you have to look for bits and pieces, little collateral signs about whether the government is doing things that they're doing. We mentioned the gas tax. One of the other things, though, that they've done is, and this was a nagging story for the Tories, the forensic nursing program, the sexual assault nursing examiner program at Health Sciences Centre, under the Tories became basically, it was abandoned. And these are the nurses who treat and support the victims of sexual assault, and also help to collect the evidence that's necessary for police investigations. And there are 6 full-time equivalent positions there. They have been filled. Now that is an important sign. It's not, that hasn't solved the problem. There's still a deficit of training, because they need specialized training. So the new government, NEP government, has its work cut out for it. But what I thought was interesting was that nurses abandoned this program, essentially in protest of the progressive conservative government. And now some nurses, maybe some of the same nurses, we don't know for sure, have come back. And just the fact that they would come back into the public system, back into this important program, is probably a semi-positive sign.
And if you think back to when Wabcanoe was on this show, he said that the most important change that needs to take place is culture. It's not X number of dollars that needs to go in, but it needs to be around an attitude. And so this may be a sign that there's a bit of a belief system within the nursing profession around changes of this government. I will tell you this, that over the holidays at the University of Manitoba, we did receive the settlement checks from the dispute way back in 2016.
Right. The penalties that
that Brian Pallister had put us on strike. And so finally, millions and millions of dollars that were paid for an unjust strike, a strike that should have never taken place because the government invited the university to lie to the faculty union and was found guilty for that. There is kind of a beginning of a shift in culture within particular segments of Manitoba in seeing, good or bad, this government is having a bit of a culture shift when it comes to certain industries in education, in nursing. And I think on the horizon, other aspects and other unions, for the mere sake, the NDP maybe has relationships that are different, may look different, especially when there's labor negotiations taking place. I mean, that is yet to be seen. As I think we've said many times that the rubber will really hit the road when the disputes come up, when people disagree, because at the moment it's a bit of a honeymoon period.
Yeah, a honeymoon. And I mean, I'm definitely showing my age here, but I do remember the 99 transition when Gary Doer's New Democrats came in after an extended period of government by Gary Filmon's Progressive Conservatives. And, I think there are high expectations among public sector unions that they're going to get everything that they want. I don't know that that's really fair. And quite frankly, the NDP has shown an ability not only to push back against public sector unions when it needs to, but manage internal party politics. Some public sector unions, but not all, have official standing in the New Democratic Party. They get automatic delegates to policy conventions and leadership conventions. So, those can be important tools to nudge government, but at least Gary Doer was very successful at keeping expectations among the unions realistic. Now, whether Wob Canoe doesn't have a history with public sector unions the way Gary Doer did. He was a union leader at one point. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think this is a good segue into, you talked about when the rubber meets the road for Wob and the new government. And just parenthetically, do you find yourself referring to Wob not as the premier, but as Wob, like we talk about Cher as Cher, like just one name? It's, is it okay to, he's the first minister of Manitoba. Can we just say Wob? Can we do that?
I think
this is
a critical moment. Yeah. This is a tipping moment in the podcast. Premier Canoe. I know that when I'm outside of Manitoba, I say Premier Canoe. When it's inside Manitoba, I say Wob.
Okay, so
I wonder what that's about. I think it might be because I think we're so used to him referring to himself in his famous "How do you do? I'm Wob Canoe." I think he kind of introduced himself to the public as this one named figure as well.
Okay. So it's his fault. That's good. That's all I need to know.
That's right.
If we're looking for a house style on this, I would say that generally in the first mention of any person, you use their title, and thereafter you can go with whatever's most appropriate or comfortable. Yeah. I seem to remember that with the former Premier, she was referred to as the Premier, and then further in conversation as Heather.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Tories always said Heather. Like that was...
Together with Heather.
Like Cher.
This is worth more research. I want to talk about one thing. I can't even
remember. I remember what I was going to do. It's the budget.
It is the budget.
Sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, a segue.
Yeah, I was going to say, that wasn't a segue. That was like me reaching out and grabbing the train that was going in the opposite direction.
I was about to say, this about the budget?
Yeah, this is. Okay, so, not really much of an official agenda until the budget, February, March. That's when the new NDP government will really get to demonstrate its acumen, the finer points of governing, because it's going to be, especially fiscally, a pretty challenging, challenge. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, but yet you can also see the legwork being done, right? That heading up to what this budget's going to look like. I mean, in December, when we were off, recovering from the election, we frequently were writing in our pieces at the Free Press about the NDP beginning to sort of set the stage for a fiscal legacy that may be somewhat tempered. Mm-hmm. And I think that the real issue here is, well, they talked about first off of finding savings or finding money, I think $123 million. But then they also brought up the aspect that there's more money committed, more money spent than that had previously been indicated by the Stephenson government. I think that budget that's coming that you're talking about will be a real litmus test as to whether Wabkanu is going to start to try to temper these very lofty expectations that people all across the board will have, particularly public sector unions, that this will be a kind of a free-for-all NDP government that I think the kind of stereotypes that NDP governments often have. But it's also led to a kind of the first jabs from the Conservatives to be able to say, oh, well, you're just blaming us for something that you're already preparing to do, or that we didn't, we fiscally knew exactly what we were doing, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The about a month after the election, the Finance Minister, Adrian Sella, and Premier Wabkanu held a news conference where they announced that the deficit left by the PC government was actually $1.6 billion, which would be the largest non-pandemic, non-natural disaster year deficit in Manitoba history. Now, to be fair, and this is the same for any government, we won't know for sure what the deficit was at the end of the most recent fiscal year, which would have been 22-23. We won't know what that is until August, September, when the public accounts come out, and that is the audited financial statement of the government of Manitoba. And if it's different, if the deficit is different than $1.6 billion by a substantial material amount, I won't be entirely shocked. But there are, to me, there's, a couple of real wild cards in the mix. Number one, the Premier has committed to keeping all of the Tory tax cuts, particularly the increased property tax rebate, which is extremely expensive, and and just the fact that he's keeping that is a source of some concern within the New Democratic Party. The second thing is, then on top of that, he did the gas tax holiday, so that's given away more money. And remember, tax cuts didn't save the PC government. It's unlikely they're going to build a lot of support for the new government. So what's a new NDP premier going to do? Well, you stand back with a catcher's mitt and you wait and you let the federal government throw you a big, fat, hairy transfer payment. So I don't know how many people followed this, but so transfers come for healthcare, they come for social services and post-secondary education, and then there's equalization. And that is the amount of money that is redistributed from richer, resource-rich provinces to less rich provinces. So we got, in equalization, $840 million additional dollars. To put that into perspective,
that's a holiday gift of many.
Well, that was almost, in 1 year, Wabkanu is going to get essentially close to what the Tories got over 3 years in straight dollar increases to equalization. So it is a huge windfall. And, the premier is trying to dampen expectations about going on a spending spree. But essentially what it allows them to do, it's going to allow them to spend more money in healthcare in particular, and still show that they're bringing the deficit down.
And some of those increased costs, which are unexpected, like Manitoba Hydro, we've got some deficit shortfalls that are going to be less noticeable as a result of that big federal transfer payment.
Yeah, I mean, and it's only for this year. We're likely to continue getting equalization for a while, and I don't really want to get into a debate about the morality of equalization But because like you're not a smarter government or a better government because you happen to be located in a part of the country that's right on top of the black gold. Right. Texas tea.
Before we jump off, though, the talking about the kind of budgetary concerns and also the kind of legacies I think that Wabkinu's inheriting, there are some still lingering issues from the provincial election in October. We ran a story at the Free Press that there's now a human rights complaint by the families of the 4 missing women at the landfill against the Conservative Party, that running the ads during that campaign that were saying we're not going to search the landfill were a direct violation of their human rights. That's interesting. That's an interesting turn, I think, in that story that takes it out of the political realm. And I think people have been still talking about the legacies of that election. People still bring up the kind of racist underpinnings of the campaign that the Conservatives ran. And of course, now we have Rochelle Squires writing for us in the paper and kind of giving us these nuggets of information inside tidbits of the Conservative election. We'll get to that in just a minute. But it's interesting to say that the Conservative Party is still, I think, in the echoes or the residue of that election. And it's a very ugly scene within the party. And I think it's really beginning to tinge this leadership campaign that's we've been dancing around the issue now for a while of like who's going to run for leadership. But Steve Lambert, our colleague at the Canadian Press, was covering last week the kind of issues around the leadership, who's going to be able to run, who's going to be able to vote, how are they going to set up the election. We know that the way Heather Stephenson came in was so controversial as Conservative leader. Who do you think is going to run for Conservative leader? That's the big question. Will it be Abby Khan? Will it be Kevin Klein? Will it be, I don't know. Rochelle Squire says you're not going to run.
Yeah, no, I believe that the fever that drives politicians to run for leadership positions, I believe that she's recovered from the fever. I mean, you never say never. And of course, the irony with Rochelle, friend of the podcast, Rochelle Squires, is that, if she had been allowed to run straight up against Heather Stephenson, if Heather had not essentially used her agents within the party to cook the process to, make it more expensive to get in than it was previously, to have a shorter campaign period, to organize sooner and wrap up all the, support among, basically tilt the field. I think the NDP were the happiest people in Manitoba that Heather Stephenson froze Rochelle Squires out of the equation. Because had she run in a straight up campaign, I kind of think she might have won.
But could she have united that party? Like, that's really the big question. Like, would she have appealed to the rural vote?
One could also ask, what would it have done to Rochelle's career? Because it didn't really matter, you could argue, who became the leader of the Progressive Conservatives after the previous premier. They were being given a difficult situation to deal with from anybody's perspective.
I think Heather Stephenson came into the job with very high negatives. Rochelle Squires, in fact, did not suffer from those super high negatives. And what was, also interesting was there are always a few personalities within a political party whose appeal and, their political capital extends beyond their core support. So you can look at Eileen Clark and the relationship she had with Indigenous people, which I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Indigenous leaders genuinely found her to be good people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know the David Chartrand was very upset when she was removed, or that's when she resigned. Sorry.
I believe I remember that story. Yes, that was me doing the head exploding, mime. So Rochelle had really, really solid, built up solid political capital with women with advocates and activists, with the Indigenous community, with municipalities, through her various, like she just was seen as very much the anti-Pallister Tory. And we, for sure, all hands up if you think they would have run a different campaign.
Well, I was about to say, like, there would
If she
not
had
be a
been the
human
leader.
rights complaint against the Conservative Party by the families of Indigenous women in landfills right now if Rochelle Squires had been leader of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, like every time a political party throws a Hail Mary or takes a real chance, like you never really know how long it's going to stick. I think don't search the landfill and family values are sticky issues that are going to, like, not necessarily among all progressive conservative voters. Let's remember, in an extremely toxic and ugly campaign organized by the Tories, they got 200,000 votes.
Oh yeah,
in Manitoba. So there's a lot of people there that were holding their nose, to vote Tory. Now, what happened? It's funny. I wrote my newsletter this week about this. I didn't really worry about speculating about who gets in. I hate handicapping people, but we know Kevin Kline and Obi Con are super interested. The interesting thing about, like, Obi Con certainly is great retail politician, successful local business person. He was also, though, really the face of the family values plank of the Tory campaign.
Those ads ran in the campaign.
And, so it'll be interesting to see whether, but more importantly, obviously he didn't disown or criticize family values, and he for sure didn't say anything, expressed no concern about we're drawing a line in the sand and we're not searching the landfill because that's the most responsible thing to do. Kevin Kline, on the other hand, basically disowned the campaign. Now, that might make him a disloyal soldier, but it might make him a smart politician in the long run.
And what the sign that I noticed that, like, I wasn't certain about Kevin Kline running. And then in our sister newspaper, cousin newspaper, other newspaper in town, he wrote an op-ed dispelling, addressing, undermining, whatever, the claims of his indigeneity. And that was something I didn't expect him to do, which tells me that he's thinking on the long term, what's my next step here? And what he addressed in that op-ed, which, although in a competing newspaper, I still encourage people to read it.
I think it's awful great that there's somewhere for Kevin Kline to go and admit that he made a mistake.
I don't think
he could have come to me, but he didn't.
Well, we might have published it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that this it blew the head off of the Manitoba Métis Federation, because essentially what he said in that was, I didn't know what the history of my family was. I know I've been claiming to be Métis for a long period of time. I still might be. I've still got to do some investigation. But the fact is that he's for years been claiming he's been claiming a Métis community that doesn't have a historical connection to the actual Métis people. And
you wrote a column about the Métis for a day. What's the slogan for those?
Well, what I said is that you can't just choose to be Métis on a Friday because you suspect that you're mixed blood. That was my nicer way of putting.
But there was also, like, the community within the Métis community that he was associated with had kind of an Amazon two-day delivery
that's
policy.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's not a legitimate Métis community according to the legitimate Métis community in Manitoba, the Red River Métis. And so if you get a chance to see the social media outcry as a result of his op-ed, particularly by Will Gooden, who's an activist in the Manitoba Métis Federation, big leader in there, just an endless series of tweets addressing that op-ed, which tells me that if Kevin Kline does decide to run, that issue is not over with. But it certainly is something that I think he was hoping would stem the tide of the concerns around what his claims to identity has been.
Yeah, I don't believe that there's any current or former member of the Progressive Conservative Caucus that would would be launching a leadership career or a bid with only carry-on luggage. I think they're checking 2 bags and a steamer trunk, and everybody's got a little something to carry. I mean, again, it's not a general election, so you really only first have to worry about your currency with Tory leaders. But in my newsletter, what I said is that anybody who's considering it ought to remember 3 things. And, number one is that in following, like a governing party, following an election in which you lose, and now you're back in opposition, you lose an incredible amount of intellectual capital in your party. Staff, advisors, strategists, whatever, everybody jumps ship. And that's always been, to a certain extent, the rule of thumb. Number 2 is, like, this is a party that really doesn't have a brand right now. You can look at the news releases that are coming out from the PC caucus, and all they can do is kind of remind people that, oh yeah, that tax cut, we did that. And that tax cut over there, yeah, we did that. Well, that didn't keep you in government. I don't know. So there's got to be, and someone's got to decide about how to separate themselves from family values and not searching the landfill.
Or they got to turn a hard right to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the Polyev strategy is, which
as yet unproven.
As yet unproven. However, we can't forget that the Maxime Bernier's strength at one time in history was Portage-la Prairie, Manitoba. You either turn hard into that hard right conservative Trump style conservatism, or you decide that you're going to go the route of the urban conservative voter. And, Kevin Klein and Abhi Khan both would be that more likely turning towards an urban one, unless they both decide to turn into some sort of rural face. The question might be, if Abhi Khan does that, then would a rural conservative Manitoba voter vote for a Muslim, an
from
urban,
Winnipeg, an affluent?
And that is a question that bends my brain a bit.
It's going to be a fascinating experience watching the leadership campaigns of whoever decides to step up to the plate for the Progressive Conservatives here in Manitoba. It's also going to be fascinating to see the party grapple with its purpose and do some introspection and determine what direction they want to move in, whether it is going that little bit closer to the centre or whether it is going that little bit further to the right, and on which issues they will decide to hang their hat.
I mean, honestly, I don't believe that there is a hard right option. I think that an attempt to go too far hard right to cultivate support in rural ridings was probably the stupidest thing that the Conservatives did, which was to further strengthen those 200,000 votes that they got are skewed by the number of votes that they got outside of Winnipeg. The fact is, inside Winnipeg, they were increasingly uncompetitive, with Heather Stephenson in tuxedo almost losing her seat. I mean, so that I think that's an indication of the limits of that strategy. But the other thing I pointed out in my newsletter is, like, for anybody thinking about this, remember the Progressive Conservatives, the party and the party membership have no patience for losing. Between 1999 and 2016, they went through 3 leaders.
Yeah.
Only one of them, Hugh McFadden, got to run in 2 elections. And so the fact is that this party very quickly, like, their expectations are sky high and usually unrealistic. And if they don't, so like 4 years from now, if whoever is leading the party doesn't win the election, well, they're going to have to fight for their lives, because somebody, some silly you-know-what within the party is going to come gunning for them, because they think that, oh my God, like, how can we not win the next election? Like, it's crazy.
Well, either way, it will be fascinating to see the leadership race tie up, and Heather Stephenson, I think, stepping away is indicative of maybe another issue. But speaking of surprising, I don't know, I'll even use the word shocking. I've been known as a bit of a pessimist. The Jets, at one point, for several days, more than just one day, like it was in the 80s when I was growing up, we're first place in the entire NHL.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lineup that no one expected them to turn this good, maybe be a playoff team, maybe be a team that would be 5th, 6th, and then quickly get swept out or definitely, in the past anyways, maybe make it to the second round, maybe get lucky. And here we are sitting with not just the Jets in the top of the league, but also Vancouver and Edmonton.
Yeah.
What's happening in the NHL, and you as being our resident NHL insider.
I'm about as close as it gets. Among
in
this
crew,
room.
in this room of 3 people, you are the closest.
I mean, you guys don't even know which direction to tape your stick. So, I mean, like,
go sports team.
Go sports team. That's right.
Hey, I played in the 90s.
No, listen, and this is a subtle, affectionate, I told you so, to some of my friends who are the hardest core and most toxic Jets fans in the world.
Well, actually, that's most Jets fans.
Yeah, no, for sure.
We're so used to being...
But, like it's, I always thought I liked Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I thought the deal with LA was fantastic. And in Kevin Cheveldayoff's time as general manager of the Winnipeg Jets, he's done this twice. You know, like he unloaded Zach Bogosian and Vander Kane for a bunch of players that then became major contributors to the conference final series that the Jets ended up playing. You know, look, the reality is that every year 31 teams don't win the Stanley Cup, right? So, like, if you're winning the Stanley Cup is the only metric that you have for loving your team unconditionally, I don't know if this is going to be the year. Maybe it is, but like, who knows, right? But the point is, like, you want your team to be competitive. You want the games to be meaningful, like game 41, 42 that we're around where we are now. And you know what? Like, this team is, my son, who is really the hockey expert in the family, he actually said it, that Winnipeg, which has trouble drawing, you know, top stars, like the guys making 11, 12, $13 million. So we have trouble drawing those guys to, you know, to have a really all-star number one line. But what we have instead is 4 number 2 lines. And you know what? Like, it's for the sake of the game, I really want Winnipeg to do some important things this year, because I think it's good for the sustainability of hockey in Canada to prove that you can be competitive. But more than that, in the broader community sense, this was a watershed year for the Winnipeg Jets. Couldn't sell tickets.
Yeah. And there's
losing
all things pointed to a possible huge failure.
Yeah. And you know, there were those of us that when the second edition came back, we sort of warned people, like, look at the history of Jets 1.0. That team was not supported until the very end. It did not have good support. And this city is, did not support that team in a way like they wanted it to be here forever. So now they got in, even though hockey is so expensive, man, holy jumping. But you know what? You got to support the team if you want them to stay. And I certainly hope that their success has reminded people of that importance.
And I also hope people notice that what has led to this season's success is European players. Like,
you're going to go there, are you? You're going to go there.
Well, I remember, you know, when I was growing up, and when I say growing up in the 90s, you know, so 80s and 90s, it was when the Jets tried to focus on North American players.
Yeah.
They always failed to get them here.
Yeah.
And who are the North American players? I was in New York over the holidays.
Okay.
I went to a Rangers game. And it is, you know, if you watch Blake Wheeler, he's sort of having a second coming. He's having revitalization. Revitalization. Jacob Trouba, like, what happened with that guy? I mean, he's turned into this major, powerful force in the blue line in the Rangers. He's also become a bully. Like, he's become this kind of leader, the captain that the Rangers have now taken and done very well. They just didn't want to play in Winnipeg. They didn't see the star power. They didn't see the...
You know how we talk about how we never disagree on the podcast? Okay,
this is our one moment?
I'm throwing down right now. So Blake Wheeler came from Atlanta, Like he was with the Atlanta franchise when it was traded to Winnipeg, the whole franchise, lock, stock, and whatever, and had the best years of his career here. And he could have forced the organization to trade him simply by not signing new contracts. So I think, and I'm not talking about there is a narrative that maybe holds him responsible a little bit for the.
It was about the last season's like turn back to Rick Bowness, like the whole locker room leaving Rick Bowness. Like, look at the locker room now.
I think that but I think that was about Blake Wheeler not meshing with the locker room, but not Blake Wheeler not being committed to playing in Winnipeg. He re-upped here, like he when he could have. Not
when you re-up, you got to re-up to the system too and to the coach.
No. But I mean, he could have just not signed an extension, and at a few years younger than when he left the team, he could have got a big payday, even a bigger payday, by going to another team, and he didn't do that. So I'm not saying he wasn't toxic in the dressing room. I'm saying I think that he and Trouba are different in terms of their commitment to the city and the franchise.
Okay. I'll give you a bit, but I'll just give you a bunch of names here.
Yeah.
And we'll go with Gustafsson, we'll go with Ehlers, we'll go with Fialbi, who's Johnson Fialbi, who is one of the fastest players I haven't seen since Pavel Bure. Nemestikov, Niederreiter, Velarde. Also, Velarde's from Kingston, Ontario.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's right.
But like, what a trade with the Kings!
Absolutely,
getting players that coming from a big market to a small market, they turn it on. I think that there's something to be said back in the 90s, back in the days of Zhamnov and Davidoff, and turning towards players that are over the other side of the pond, understanding the kind of culture in Winnipeg. Seeing, I happen to be in the same neighborhood as Nikolai Ehlers. And so that guy really loves the city and he really cares about the city. He likes the culture here. There's something to be
said. Connor Hellebuck re-upping this past summer. Do you know that his agent is from Steinbach?
Well,
how many NHL hockey players use an agent from rural Manitoba?
Well, wasn't there who was that guy? Don. He was also from Winnipeg. He was the agent for the guy way back in the day. All those guys in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. But I think when you got a guy that can show you the benefits to playing in Winnipeg, I think there is the North American player can see the benefits in here. But I do think that there's a bit of a formula here happening that's reminiscent of the 90s. I'm hoping that it will carry them into the playoffs. I'm hoping that there will be more success, and this won't be the Jets of the past that do amazing in November and December, and then suddenly in March we ask, where did they go?
Well, no, for sure. I mean, I think that the most that the Jets organization can hope for is that they get talented hockey players who want to be here. And personally, and this is again from a lifetime of watching hockey at all levels. So I have a theory, that the Winnipeg Jets are developing, they're becoming an organization where players who maybe aren't bona fide number one line players, but they know they can come to Winnipeg and they will get a fair chance, whether they're on the second, third, or fourth line, they're going to get a fair chance to make a contribution. So they're going to get more ice time. It's going to be spread more evenly. It's a little bit more of a meritocracy, and where these guys, quite frankly, the Winnipeg Jets are not going to be the lowest spending team in the NHL. So if they're not paying three guys $12 million or more.
Geez, I wonder who you're talking about.
Yeah, whatever. I don't want to go there. And no, but easily, what that ends up being is a little bit more for the guys on the second and third and fourth line, right? Where they're getting a little more love, they're getting a little more ice time. And so what you really have is a team with interchangeable pieces and more of a consistent, more of a commitment to the franchise. And once they're committed to the franchise, then that kind of opens them up and they see the value of, I can live like a king here.
There's also something to be said about the way that system of consistent players holding themselves accountable builds a kind of youth development. If we see the way Scheifele developed over the years, he was really built by this team slowly going from the third, fourth line, building up. And we're actually seeing Perfetti. We're seeing Perfetti follow that same model. Yep. And if Perfetti turns into half the player that Scheifele is, I would say he's actually probably already there now. That will be a great benefit for years to come. Yeah. And that was the sports segment of our
that is. I would just like to finish off again with the use it or lose it.
Bums in seats.
Yeah, if you can't afford season tickets, save up. However you save up, and pick a game and go. You can get into.
They did have a great deal over the holidays, the $99 deal.
There's lots of great deals.
You got 2 tickets and you got a toque out of it. We actually bought that for our family. It's a pretty good deal.
Because you don't have enough Winnipeg Jets branded, clothing. That's why you needed the toque.
We needed a toque. That's really what we needed. It was for my it matches my vest,
stepfather. My windbreaker, my parka, the 14 T-shirts, the hooded Wasik sweatshirt.
I was going to say with the Indigenous logo. But let's get to the big ticket item we've been dancing around the whole podcast, which is the big thing we want to talk about.
Time out. You know what? Along with my 2 resolutions for the podcast, which is to be briefer in the opening segment and apparently to be less profane. The other one is that we need to be shorter overall. So show of hands here that we wrap up the podcast and not go into something that's going to take us another 20 minutes to discuss. All in favor? Okay, for those of you who can't see,
I put my hand up forcibly.
Yeah, forcibly, that's right.
But I think what we wanted to do is just sort of bring us back to season 3 of the podcast and get us sort of recovered since the election.
Grounded.
Reconnect after the holidays, dust off the cobwebs, sort of ground ourselves in what's been going on in the last little while, and then look ahead to that elephant that's looming in the corner of the room that you'll have to tune into next episode to learn more about.
Ooh, cliffhangers.
And if you can look to see what is it that both Dan and I have been writing about and is a issue that seems to be just ballooning, but we'll have a lot more to say, we will do in the next upcoming shows.
But it's there is lots to talk about, and who knows, very soon we could be interviewing leadership hopefuls.
Will they come on the show is the big question, but
you know what happened to the last progressive conservative leader who didn't come on the show?
I'm sure that was the downfall.
I have to tell you what happened?
I have a feeling that was a major
and the
part
guy
of
who came on the show 3 times.
Well, the proof is in the pudding. Bump. The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, it's the bump.
I still hope that future friend of the podcast, Heather Stephenson, will join us at some point. If anything, just to debrief.
The invitation is open.
Most definitely.
I'm lurking most evenings at Vic's Market on Pembina Highway.
Oh, jeez.
Waiting for her to come back.
You're just wandering around in a circle with a shopping cart that just has 2 pieces of cheese in it.
That's right. And a microphone.
I will just add, before we sign off for this week, that I want to just thank everybody. I've gotten tons of messages. I've taken a little leave from the Free Press. I'm still doing the pod. I can't escape from Dan.
You wrote a book.
And I'm just working on this book right now. So the name of the book is Winnipeg, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center. And it's with McClellan and Stewart. Comes out May 28th. And I'm actually just still working on the photographs, putting the photographs in today. Mike Aporius and all the great photographers that we have. And also local Winnipeg photographer Dan Harper his work is going to be in the book. And I'm just taking a little break off writing for a couple months. I'm leaving Dan to do all of the stories, and I'm sending all of the landfill stories your direction.
Yeah, Dan's not amused, of course, but he understands. He is supportive and he understands, but he is not amused.
I think I'm sending you every single story that I get from different people in the community.
Perfect. That sounds good. Thank you, brother, for coming back.
I'm around, but just thanks to everybody for the great messages, and I'm still around.
And I'm just excited to read the book when it's published and have you as a guest on your own podcast so that we can interview you about the book.
Will that happen? Am I booked? Am I booked in season 3?
We'll have our people get back to your people as well.
That's right.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see you in a week's time, I hope.
Miigwech, thanks.